we are in the middle of chapter 31. We're actually going to be finishing this chapter. It begins with the chitas of the 7th of Adar, if that helps you find the spot, the Zos. And just to give a quick summary of what we've been talking about, and this is not only a summary of this chapter, but it's the last couple of chapters. It's sort of ending a little bit of a theme here that's going to lead us into something a little bit more new or of a different angle in the next chapter. So the Alter Rebbe is talking to the person who is experiencing Timtum Halev, clogged heart, very much like we're reading in the Parshas, and we're going to see that explicitly in this chapter, that the discharging of the annoyances, the trappings of the impulses of the physical are similar to the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, very much the Parshas, and how that magnetic pull that Mitzrayim has over the Jewish people becomes something that they are constantly having to pull away from. So in the course of the last few chapters, the Alter Rebbe spoke about always bittul. It's always going to be bittul. You can count on that. Remember, we had the analogy that if the log doesn't catch on fire, don't blame the fire, chop up the log. We also talked about in the beginning of this chapter about even possibly going into, albeit the dangerous field of atzvis, of being somewhat despondent and annoyed and getting a little fired up about our physicality, because passion can be a good thing. And even though generally speaking, atzvis is verboten, but like we talked about with medicine, all medicine is a form of poison. Why then do we take medicine? Because we hope to kill off the disease before we harm the healthy, which is why if a healthy person takes the medicine, they'll get sick. So therefore, when applied cautiously and not for the objective in and of itself, but as a spur to something greater, even atzvis can be necessary. And remember, we're talking to a person who's already in a bad spot. He already has this timtum halev, this rock hardening of his heart. So the concern that atzvis will bring him down, he's already down. He's already in trouble. Just like, again, God forbid, the person's already sick, and therefore applying something that would ordinarily make a healthy person sick is appropriate, because, again, it is going to be applied cautiously to rid the sick person of the sickness without harming the healthy. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to, again, talk to us about the necessity of simcha. That, again, simcha shouldn't be confused with silliness. It's about having an enthusiasm. That's probably a better translation in context, to be passionate and enthusiastic about what we are doing. And by doing that, that itself will help lift us out, to get some momentum going, like we might call it, and then in that manner to help us swing out from the timtum halev. We're also going to be, again, talking about, mentioned earlier, the mashal, the analogy of the story that we're reading in the Parshas now about leaving Mitzrayim and how hard that is. Who wants to leave Mitzrayim? Everybody. Who actually leaves Mitzrayim? About 20%, because it's very difficult to pick up and leave, and the magnetic force to constantly drag us back. Again, we're not saying Parsha, but just as an example, the opening line of this week's Parsha is that when Paro sent the people out, Hashem deliberately did not take us through the most efficient path. Why? Because Hashem was afraid that the first minute we were out of Egypt, we'd see what was out there. We'd go, okay, let's go back to Egypt. It's too hard. This is too difficult. I want to go out there. It's the mean streets, and I don't want to deal with it. I want to go home. Okay, so we are, again, it's the chitas that begins the 7th of Adar. I don't know what page it is in all the different publications, the new lessons in Tanya, the old lessons in Tanya. The Hebrew word begins, V'zois tia avoidasai. And this should be the person's avodah.
Excuse me. Hi, it's Miriam Sarah. Good to vach.
You froze up on us. You froze. Your audio and video froze. Okay, well, that gets corrected. Just to add one other point that we talked about in summary. Oh, there you go. Okay, you're back.
My connection's unstable. I wanted to know what page you're on, and also if you could turn up your volume.
I don't know how I turn up my volume. I think you would have to turn up on your side. I can
I'm all the
shout.
way up. Okay.
Okay.
Mary, sorry, it's
It's
414.
men. And if you have just your standard print, the top page on the top page, it's mem.
Mem.
Yeah. So look on the
Okay.
top, it's page mem. And on the bottom, it's about 5 lines from the bottom. Exactly 5 lines from the bottom. The first word on the line, the zos. I don't know exactly what the English, and this is should be your service.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay. So also, just one other point, the Alter Rebbe specifically spoke about davening. And again, we talked about the distinctive characteristic of davening, which it's supplicatory character, in contrast to learning or even mitzvahs, where it's interesting, it's meaningful, and so on. And the Alter Rebbe used an analogy that to simply have Rahmanis on your neshama. Here's my neshama that came as part of Hashem in the highest of spiritual realms. And because it's Hashem's plan, it's brought down into my goofy goof, into my physical body, where my body wants to eat and sleep and drink, and not even necessarily bad things, although it's exposed to all kinds of bad things, which is a strong part of the problem. But the mere fact that it has to endure physical things, it's simply to have Rahmanis, have simple human compassion for my poor neshama that's stuck down here. And imagine if I could free somebody who's been held captive and separated from their family, what a great simcha that would be, and how happy I would be to be able to participate in that. Well, in a similar fashion, when I allow my neshama to do what it wants to do, I am empowering it to, again, be free from the trappings of the human existence. Okay. The zois tia avoidasai. This should be a person's service. Now, we've talked about this word. It's obviously an important one. Avoida translates as work or service or labor or something like that. But it's not just about what we do. It's not to be confused even with what we do that's very important. Certainly not with just busy work. The term avoida, as we use it in Chassidus, means the transformation of our character. Remember this classic analogy of turning raw animal hide into soft leather. It is a process that is not going to happen by itself. It requires an enormous amount of effort to transform it into something that it will not naturally grow into. Of course, even growing plants requires great care and attention. And then there is the idea of wild growth. You know, you throw the seeds in there, something will likely grow. But turning cowhide into leather requires enormous energy and effort. It's a true transformation. So that's what we're talking about here. Not just what we do, but how we transform ourselves. Kol yamav, all of your life. B'simcha rabba, with great simcha. Now, we know this is a classic hallmark of Hasidim, and they're always happy and smiling and so on. But it shouldn't be confused with silliness or just raw emotion. But it should be, I know this is going to sound like a funny thing to say, a very serious simcha. What is a serious simcha? It is a simcha that is born of something of true significance, not just of some fleeting indulgence in butterscotch pancakes. He simchas hanefesh b'tzeisa mihaguf hamatuav v'shavla beisavia k'nureha b'shas haTorah v'avoda. So, what is the example of that? The example is the great simcha that we have when we release a prisoner from their prison. When the neshama is released from the being entrapped in the crassness and the almost like the disgustingness of its humanity, and it is returned back to its father's house when a person learns Torah and serves Hashem. So the release of the nefesh elokis, that's what a true simcha is, because it's sustainable. A simcha born of some transient passing indulgence. It's fun in the moment, but when the moment is past, it's over. It's like the roller coaster. What do we say as soon as we get off the roller coaster? When's the next one? I mean, we're constantly looking for the next thrill because it doesn't have sustainability. True simcha has eternal sustainability. And that simcha in this context is the release of the neshama from its being entrapped, which here, has a very important message, because once we realize that that is our avodah, that is our way of transforming ourselves, we stop being just annoyed by why is my humanity constantly calling out for buy me, take me, get me. And isn't that annoying? And when am I going to be able to move on with life and not have to always be annoyed by all of these different things that are gnawing at my attention? And the answer is, that is my objective. That is my service of Hashem. And therefore, instead of seeing it as just this like nuisance, and I just leave me alone so I can move on, we should rather understand that this is our opportunity for the continuous transformation of our innate identity into our refined identity. Kamaim Razal, like our sages say, liyos kol yamav b'tshuva, to spend all our time in tshuva. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a pretty despairing kind of message. I spent all my time saying, I'm sorry for this. I'm sorry. I don't even have any time to do anything wrong. It's like the joke. I overheard the guy crying so much in Yom Kippur, I started to get jealous of all the fun things he did. So what do you mean spend all my time doing tshuva? When am I going to have time to do anything wrong? So we don't mean tshuva just in the al-chet sense of tshuva. I did this wrong, I did that wrong. What we mean by tshuva in this context is an endless pursuit of being connected with Hashem. So it's not just some sort of second-rate annoyance, but this is my constant sense that I am trying to connect to myself with Hashem. And look what the Alter Rebbe says. There is no greater simcha than being released from prison. The greatest simcha is to be released from prison, to be released from something that is preventing me from being who I truly am. Now, we're not only talking about literal prison, or even the stories of our ancestors in Mitzrayim, or even the stories of people who were in Russia and trapped in gulags and so on, and then suddenly, through a miracle, were able to get on a train or a plane and wind up in Eretz Yisrael, and what that would mean for them, and so on and so forth. But it's also true of us. Whatever it is that imprisons us, whatever our personal meitzorim, the word Mitzrayim meaning trap or confinement, whatever it is that we are confined in, to be able to be released from that. And we are released from that when we understand that that's not our identity. Our identity is not our humanity. Our identity is our neshama. And when we are able to access our neshama, we are able to discharge our humanity as its dominance identity. And, this is that classic thing. Are we souls with bodies or bodies with souls? What is it that is our primary identity? So, and here the Alter Rebbe lays down something that we're familiar with sort of culturally, but Tanya being the source, it's a great simcha. Now, I know this sounds bizarre, but as we've talked about, there can be a great temptation to be like, I don't want to say depressed is the wrong word, but like despondent or like sad all the time. Oh, I'm so virtuous. Oh, I'm so sad. Oh, everything is so terrible, and so on. I know that sounds ridiculous, but there is a certain temptation to feel that sort of down in the dumpsness because it somehow validates all of my sufferings. But rather than wallow in our sufferings and about what a terrible person I am, we can rather jettison that by celebrating the great liberation from our guf. There is a story, it's somewhat of a comical story. I probably said it before, but you're too polite to tell me that. But that somewhat illustrates this point. There was a Rav in Kfar Chabad, his name was Rabbi Gorelick, and he was the Rav of Kfar Chabad. So he came to 770 once, and when the Rebbe saw him, the Rebbe said in an honorary way, oh, it's the Rav of Kfar Chabad. So Rabbi Gorelick said in a self-deprecating way, Kfar Chabad could have a better Rav. So he was sort of being humble. So the Rebbe said to him, so be better. You think they could? So be better, meaning, so you don't like your goof. You think, your impulses. Oh, why am I so lazy? Why am I so indulgent? You don't like it? Leave. Meaning, leave that as your identity. It doesn't have to be your identity. Your identity is your neshama. Stop identifying yourself by your humanity with its limitations and its annoyances and all that thing that we discussed, and have a great simcha. Now, here the Alter Rebbe says it is a simcha gedola, a great simcha. Commercial ben Hamelch Shai b'Shivya, like imagine a king's son who was in prison, b'toichin b'beis asurim, and he was forced to grind something in the prison. Umenavel ba'ashva, and he was laying in the filth. V'yotzel l'chavshi el beis avi, and he went free, and he was returned back to the palace. Hamelech, the king, his father, the king. Even though he's still, dirty, they just pulled him out of the prison, and he hasn't yet cleaned up. Like the Zayah says, the nikra mashcha duchuya, it's called the skin of the snake. We'll talk about that. Which the metaphor is that even when I take this new path, I still have my animal soul. I still have all of my untransformed characteristics. Lichlal b'kedusha, it has not become completely subsumed in holiness. My humanity is still my humanity. We'll come back to this. We call makam, nevertheless, tikar nafshay be'ena. His neshama will be so precious in his eyes. L'smeich b'simchasa, to find its great simcha. Yosem mihaguf hanivaza, more than the lowly, disgraced body. That he will not allow his simcha of his soul being freed to be somehow dragged down by the despondence, there's that word again, of the body. So let's back up here and look at some of these in real specific detail. So first of all, the Alter Rebbe talks about a simcha gedola. Now, 3 lines above, he used the first line that we began with today. He used a different phrase. He said simcha rabba. So if you look right where we started today, all his days with a great simcha or an abundant simcha, and now he calls it a big simcha. Again, in English, it's hard to nuance them because we have so many synonyms. But in Hebrew, it's clearly 2 different words. The first word, again, it's in the first line we started with today. This should be his service all his days with simcha rabba, abundant simcha. I don't know how they translate it. And here we said that a person should spend all his days in tshuva, and that will bring him a simcha gedola, a big simcha. What's the difference between a simcha rabba? Again, in English, they may translate them even identically. I don't know. But what's the difference between them? So one is talking about the quantity, and the other is talking about the quality. And as we mentioned before, one of the issues that we have, and our many issues, is that simcha, when it's the product of some specific event, it's fleeting. Now, that's just the nature of it. And when it's over, we're looking for the next thrill. And that's the thrill meter is constantly going up. In contrast, when it is a genuine simcha, that is such, what we're talking about here, the release of the neshama from the trap of the body, that can be a simcha rabba. It can be essentially infinite. It's in quantity. It doesn't just last for the few minutes of the thrill, or it's linked because it is a simcha gedola. It has great quality to it. It's a mature form of simcha, as opposed to the fleeting form of simcha that we get, like I said, from the roller coaster or from some transient pleasure. We talk about this, perhaps a way to illustrate it. We know that in Shulchan Aruch it tells us that when the month of in the summertime begins, we are to minimize our simcha. It's the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av. Everyone's familiar with the rules. So what does that entail? That we don't eat meat and we don't drink wine and we don't listen to music and we don't go on pleasure trips, all the different halachas that we're familiar with during the 9 days. So Chassidus reads it a little bit differently. They read it when the month of Av comes in, we minimize, and then we sort of put a little inflection there, through Simcha. So what does that mean? That we minimize the sadness of the 9 days through Simcha. So you say, what do you mean? You're not allowed to eat. Does that mean you're allowed to eat meat? Of course not. You're allowed to drink wine? Of course not. You're allowed to meat? No. What do we mean? That since the depth of sadness of the 9 days is so intense, it can't be remedied with a nice glass of wine and a delicious steak and some nice music. That ordinarily, look, a person could experience a little, like we call it, down in the dumps. So they have a nice, delicious meal. They put on some nice music. They have a glass of wine, and it lifts their spirits. And it's not a bad thing, but it's a transient thing. But it's okay to offset a mild case of the blues. But when it comes into the month of and we're talking about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, and we're talking about the saddest events, and et cetera, et cetera. So now we have to have a true simcha. So what is the simcha? It's not that you can't have the steak, you can't have the wine, you can't have music. What does it have to be? It has to be something so much more liberating, like Torah learning, mitzvahs, of course, et cetera, that it can even release us from a sadness that is associated with a lot more than just, feeling a little blue. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is talking about here. So this concept that we are all familiar with, it's sort of base level Chabad 101, that Hasidim are happy and you're always about being besimcha and we're not about being depressed, and you can never get these guys down. Everything it's better that way. Oh yes, we wanted that to happen. Everything is always better this way and better, and Kamzu Latova. You can't get these guys down. It's not just some sort of naivete or some sort of disregard for the seriousness of life, or that we have so many fun things that we can offset any threat to our happiness. Because it's not that kind of, again, I don't mean to diminish it because it can be valuable in certain circumstances, but it's not that transient sort of play kind of happiness. It's a deeper sense, and this is what the Alter Rebbe is alluding to with using two different terms. Simcha Rabbah, the first one, it's abundant, it's long-lasting, because it's Simcha Gedola, it has a greater quality to it, again, than just the transient. Then the Alter Rebbe went on to further nuance the analogy of releasing the prince who's been trapped in prison. And then the Alter Rebbe gives some color to that prison. He is in prison, that's stage one. Stage number two, he is being forced into labor in that prison. He's in a labor camp. And number three, he's laying in the pile of filth. So this isn't only some sort of abstract mushal. It wasn't that long ago that this was the fate of so many of the Hasidim who were sent to the gulags. I mean, they were in prison, they were in harsh labor, and they were not in very accommodating lodging, So this wasn't just a sort of antiquated sense of slave labor. What then is the metaphor? Why does the Alter Rebbe have to nuance it, not just to be melodramatic? So first of all, the Alter Rebbe, again, we're trying to envision the Nefesh Elokis. It's in prison. It wants to be in Shemayim. I mean, we've talked about this before, where we have to sort of force the godly soul, ironically, to do what Hashem wants, not what it wants. I know that sounds funny, because we tend to think that that's what we do with the animal soul. But it's also a little bit what we do with the godly soul, because the godly soul wants out of here, like Aaron's two sons. They don't want to hang around here, traffic and nuisance and all this stuff. It wants out of here. So it's like, get back here. That's where Hashem wants you to be. So it's where it doesn't want to be, innately. Not only is it where it doesn't want to be, it is compelled to do things it doesn't want to do. Eat, drink, sleep. It has to do all of this Gashmiya stuff that it doesn't want to do. And where does it do it? it does it in a place that mocks it. Meaning, again, people who, I mean this sincerely, I'm a rabbi, that's what I do. And everybody expects the rabbi to behave that way. But people who live in the world of harshness and falseness, not only do people not revere, I know this from people telling me, oh, that you're so pious, and they mock it. It's not they say, oh, wow, I have such respect for you that you observe Shabbos, that you observe the laws of modesty. No, they may mock it. They may make fun of it. So not only are you forced to go into a world that is not comfortable, B, you're forced to endure all the stuff that you don't like, and C, they don't revere you. I mean, we have this myth that everyone's going to look up to you and say, wow, I really am admiring. Hopefully, I mean, and I'm sure it happens. It does happen, Kiddush Hashem, for sure. But I know from people telling me that that's not the common life experience. On the contrary, the common life experience is people mock it. So that's real Mesiras Nefesh. And now imagine that's what the neshama is going through as well. So imagine you would get released and you get taken out of that environment. So there's a great simcha there. I don't have to be around a place I'm not comfortable in. I don't have to be around a place where I have to do things I don't want to do. And I don't have to be in a place where everybody is mocking me for standing up for something that is appropriate. And this is the story of the Jewish people. I mean, Paro, not that we're here to have a pity party for Paro, but essentially, this was his bewilderment. Why would you want to leave Egypt? Everybody wants to be in Egypt. Everybody wants to be Egyptian. Yes.
Can I just ask a question? So, I don't know. I always learn, though, on the other side, and I found it to be true that if I just stay like staunch and like it within my real beliefs, like even at work, I work with all Goyim, right? Actually, at my school, I don't even know if most of them have ever even seen a Jew. It's a completely Spanish school. They don't even speak English really. And when it came to the holidays, they're like, oh, that Hanukkah thing is really Kwanzaa. Like they had no idea about anything. So, but if I like say it in a way like it's my belief and this is what I stand for, like this is what I do, they actually ask questions, like they're interested in knowing about it because I'm so like definite about it. It's when I get wishy-washy or give in or that then so like, oh,
Well, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, blessed memory, said, Gentiles respect Jews who respect Judaism. Amen. I mean, hopefully that should be everyone's experience, but I have been told by people who live out there in the world of falseness that that's not always the case. They're not always respected and revered. I mean, it depends on the person. I'm talking about the respecter, not the Jew. But you're right. I mean, the more we stand strong, the more we are releasing our neshama from the trap. So yes, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that everybody does that. I'm not saying everyone does that. I'm just saying that's been my experience is if I keep it straight and simple, then at least it's not mocked. It's like, listened to.
Amen.
Maybe not.
Amen. May it always be. But imagine the Nefesh Elokis, again, he's in a place he doesn't want to be, doing stuff he doesn't want to do, and he's being constantly bombarded. Now we take him out of that. Again, we're releasing him from prison. What a great simcha. What a great joy.
And we do that by knowing that the mitzvahs and the Torah and the learning, like we have to, as people, know that that's what the real simcha is.
That's correct. Right? Okay. Because and in this case, when we do it for the Nefesh Elokis, we are empowering the Nefesh Elokis to be able to do what it wants, when it wants, and where it wants, instead of being forced into doing something it doesn't want. So the experience, and again, as the Alter Rebbe reminds us, even though, how come then I davened, I learned, I did all the things, how come I'm still me, right? My humanity, and in this context, I'm this a little bit exaggerated. I'm using that as an insult, but that's exaggerated. But in our context, the humanity is the oppositional to the spiritual in this context. And again, we're talking to a very specific person who's experiencing Timtum Alev. We shouldn't misunderstand that to mean that humanity is always in conflict with godliness. It's not always in conflict with godliness, but we're talking to a person that's his experience. His humanity is dragging him away from godliness. That's the audience of this chapter. I know I said that 3 times, but I want to emphasize it, that this is a prescription for a very specific circumstance. Even though it's still there, it's just like it was before, because remember the Beinoni, his Nefesh HaBahamis is not even diminished. It's certainly not transformed. It's not destroyed. It's still there, and it's still nagging him, and it's still gnawing at him. But it's still just as bringing him back. Again, maybe like this analogy, he's still going to work the next day, but somehow he has this liberation. And again, it's not my personal experience because I get to be the rabbi, so I don't have to live in that world. But there's a story, they say, that, remember back in the ancient times, like in the 70s, during the time of the refuseniks, who would have believed, to talk about Mashiach's times, they would say, how do you know who the refuseniks are? They're the only ones who are happy. So how could they be happy? They've lost their job, they're tormented. Right, because they have a happiness. And this is the thing that sort of, Paro didn't understand, and Haman didn't understand, and the communists didn't understand. How come you still stick to your Yiddishkeit? Don't you see that Egypt is better? I mean, we're richer and stronger and so on. I mean, that becomes the validation. So, the problem is you don't know. You're living up in Goshen. So I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll give you a work program. We'll bring you down into the center. We'll bring you to LaSalle Street. We'll bring you into the depth of the community. You'll get the opportunity to become Egyptian. And certainly you'll jettison this whole God thing because you want to be Egyptian. Because don't you realize that being Egyptian is better, because being Egyptian means you have wealth, you have security, all of these things, which of course those go away, just like it went away for Spain and Sweden and Soviet Union and on and on and on. But in the moment, they're so sure that this is going to be forever. So they're shocked. And that's why it's called, that's the analogy of the skin of the snake. What is the skin of the snake and not the snake? So we know that in Torah, the snake is held up as sort of the antithesis of godliness. The original snake, even the story with Moshe, when he throws the staff down and it becomes a snake. So a snake is a representative of opposition to Hashem. Why is a snake worse than a buffalo? I don't know, but that's what it is. And that's why it crawls on the ground, it eats dirt. It's representative of that which is the least of the animal kingdom in opposition. So the snake is called the Sholosh Klipos Tameus Lagamre. The snake is in total denial of Hashem. What about the skin of the snake? The skin of the snake is like a Klipas Noiga, meaning the snake sheds its skin. We're not here to study animal science, but this sort of the metaphor that the skin is the klipa, it's concealing godliness, but you can pierce it. And this is where the Beinoni struggles. And even though his humanity is still just as nagging him, buy me, take me, get me, do this, fix it, make it for me, buy me, take me, get me, even though his humanity is still clawing for his attention, he is still able to be a Beinoni. And it's like, now that I'm a Beinoni, why isn't everything perfect? As often happens. People think, okay, when I get past this, then everything will be perfect. And one of the messages that the Alter Rebbe has conveyed since the beginning is life is a participation sport. It's not that we do something, then we don't have to do anything ever again. How much more I got to do, and then you're going to leave me alone? And our answer is no, it's about being constantly in the relationship. The struggle to do the right thing is the success. The American society has sort of bought into this idea that success is the product of something, and then you don't have to ever do it again. So, you go to second grade, you manage second grade, now you don't have to go to second grade anymore. So we think that that's what life is. You work, and then I don't ever have to, and everybody's got the date circled on their calendar, then I get to retire, then I don't ever have to worry about anything. And that's why we get a lot of disappointment when people get to a certain point. They say, how come I'm still working? How come I still have to struggle? And the Alter Rebbe's point is the struggle is the service of Hashem. That is being engaged in life. I mean, God forbid, you want to see no struggle, go down, God forbid, to the morgue. There's no struggle. I mean, I don't need to be crass about it, but that's the idea. There's no struggle. Okay. Because the very essence and fabric has not been transformed into good and subsumed in holiness. So the Beinoni's got sort of two issues they're dealing with. One, the reality that he is always going to deal with his humanity. And again, in this context, humanity is a negative. He's always going to have to deal with the struggle. I'm hungry. I'm tired. My hair's on fire. Me. And the great simcha that he is able to give his nefesh elokis a release from that unpleasant circumstance that we described when he engages in Torah and mitzvahs. So that is the joy that the Beinoni is able to have while constantly being aware that he has got this ongoing struggle. And here the Alter Rebbe continues. Mikol makom, nevertheless, tiker nafshoy be'einav. He should hold precious his soul in his eyes. And it's that word tikar, to hold precious, I don't know if it's got like a lot of oomph to it. That's a really strong word. Cherish it, value it. Lismeich b'simchasa, to be happy in its happiness. Yoiser mi haguf hanevasa, more than the body. Shlel arev ulevalbel simchas hanefesh batzman haguf. Do not allow the simcha of the soul to be dragged down and confused with the body. Again, people have this experience. You take off Yontif, and then all the coworkers figure, oh, wow, you got it. You're so lucky. You have all these holidays. You just laze around. You don't have to go to work, because they think the holidays are all like July 4th. Well, we do eat too much, but they think, there's, in fact, I don't have to only go to a modern day. This is a medrash. In the medrash, it tells us that the nations came to Hashem and they said, it's not fair. You gave the Bnei Yisrael all of these mitzvahs. Give us some mitzvahs. So Hashem gave them the mitzvah of sukkah. So with great enthusiasm, they built a beautiful sukkah, and Hashem made it hot. And they were sitting in the sukkah, said it's too hot, and they walked out and they kicked the sukkah. So there's all kinds of explanations. I mean, top to bottom, which is worthy of independent discussion. But the core message is, the presumption is, you have all these holidays. Passover, wow, you're so lucky. You get take off, and you take off before too, so you can, sleep late and, sit around and do nothing. Then if they would find, I'd rather go to work than have all these holidays. Meaning the concept of the physical, the body, the human simcha, again, and we're not talking about a holy form, is contrary to a spiritual simcha. This the Rambam writes as well about the importance, ancient history, we used to have guests, the importance of having the poor and making sure that they have simcha. We talk about, the tzedakah and so on, because otherwise, the Rambam says, it's just a simcha of the body. If all we see Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot and Pesach is about eating and so on, and that's all it is, then it's no different than it's purely of the body. But it has to be something of Kedusha. And, we bring the Kedusha in the food, all the things that we are familiar with. So this is what the Alter Rebbe is like forewarning us. If we will make our joy about our neshama, then even though, we have this body and the body is always nagging us, but if our joy will be a joy of the neshama, not a joy of the body, we will have true and uninterruptible simcha. Again, this is the analogy to Yetzias Mitzrayim, which, it's nice because it's the parshas here as well. Remember, we were stuck in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means to be trapped. And just amongst us, we were almost indistinguishable from the Egyptians. So much so, like we mentioned, that even in the first verse of this week's parsha, Hashem tells us when Paro sent the Israelites out, and you think they're walking as tall as could be, this is the greatest. Hashem deliberately took them in an awkward way because he didn't want them to get scared and run back to Egypt. I mean, they would run back to Egypt. They've been out 5 minutes, right? Because That's the temptation, is to go back to Egypt. It has like this magnetic pull. Shenemar ball, like it says, Ki barach ha'am, the people fled. We eat matzah amongst the many reasons because we left in such a hurry. Why do we have to leave in a hurry? When in last week's parsha, when Paro came to Moshe in the middle of the night during the death of the firstborn, he said, leave, leave, leave. And Moshe said, no, we're not leaving now in the middle of the night. We're going to leave in the daytime. We're not running out in the middle of the night like criminals. So why were we running? Are we running or not running? We could have made bread then, because when you're going to leave, it's like jumping off the high dive board. You just got to do it. The more you're going to think about it, the more you're going to talk yourself out of it. So they had to run. The Lechayru Tamur, this seems odd. Why was this so? If Hashem would have told Paro, you got to go, then just go. Why do they have to do it in this sort of funny way? And again, in the parsha, it's where the pasuk says that Paro was told that the Israelites left. He was told, he didn't know. But what happened was, you remember that way back in the beginning of the story, Moshe said, send us away for 3 days. So Paro, in his delusional state, thought, okay, maybe they're going to go for 3 days and then they're going to come back. When they didn't come back, why did it have to be this way? Again, why do we have to have all the plagues? Why did Hashem have to harden Paro's heart, or even allow Paro to harden his own heart? Why didn't Hashem just send Moshe, look, Paro, we're leaving, goodbye. He has no choice. He can't stand up against Hashem. But the problem wasn't Paro. The problem was us. Imagine Moshe goes to Paro the first day, says, send out the Israelites. And Paro says, fine, go. What might have happened was they would say, he's not such a bad guy. We can work this out. We'll have, we'll negotiate some better working terms. The Israelites had to realize that Egypt was a non-starter. And again, once they kill the firstborn and you have blood painted on your doorpost, there's no recovering from that. There's no like, okay, well, we can still work this out. Egypt was decimated through 10 plagues, and any hope that the Israelites would have any way of sort of working it out with the Egyptians was gone. They had killed their firstborn, and they couldn't deny that they were part of it because their doorposts were painted with blood. There was no way the Israelites could. Egypt was a non-option at this moment. Why did that have to be? Not only for Paro, but for us, because there's a great temptation we can work this out. But what was really going on was that the Israelites had been so infested with Egyptianism that they had to run away from this. They had to absolutely just like hold your nose and jump off the high dive board, because there's no way that they can sort of reason their way to leave. The filth of Egypt had so infested them that would not be snapped until the giving of the Torah, when Hashem would reveal himself and transform them. But again, even that didn't last very long, because what happened 40 days after Sinai? They built the golden calf and said, let's go back to Egypt. So it's always easier to do nothing. It's always easier to maintain the status quo. There is all these studies where they talk about the default to normalcy. They tell these stories about people, God forbid, are in plane crashes and they don't do what they're supposed to do. Why? Because they get panicked. So in the panic mode, they just convince themselves that's not so bad, it's not so bad, it's not so bad. And again, not blaming them. But even, 10 months ago, we thought, oh, come on, how long could this last? A week or two? This is ridiculous, because we can't get our arms around something so dramatic and traumatic. And then what happens is a little bit the opposite. Now we're stuck in this lull and we're like, yeah, this is not so bad. We can work this out and so on and so forth. It's hard Gula is hard. I remember, to use this as an illustration, when the Rebbe really started speaking about Mashiach with greater enthusiasm and so on. So me personally, maybe other people, maybe I'm just projecting, we thought the hardest thing is going to be to convince the world that Mashiach is coming. They're not going to believe it. Oh, come on, it sounds too fantastical. But what we ran into that we didn't anticipate was people did believe it and they weren't so enthusiastic about it. I got to go to Israel, but I just got this and like that old joke from what is it, Fiddler on the Roof? Let God send the Cossacks to Israel. It's hard. Change is hard and difficult and radical and so on. Can't we just kind of thing? So we have to run away. When we get our enthusiasm, we have to go, because our nefesh habahamis is always dragging us back to sitting on the couch. And this is the point. What happened then when they had this kind of revelation of godliness? We had this passion to get out of here and be connected with Hashem. Like it says, Hashem oizi umi oizi menusa b'yem tzara. Hashem is my strength, and He gives me strength, and I flee to Him on the day of my suffering. Miskabi munasi, He is my sort of safe place. Hu manoi sli, and He will protect me. And therefore, la'asi kishiyavar Hashem ruach hatovim min haaretz ksiv u'menusa lo yisalechud kihelech l'nechem Hashem v'goymer. When Mashiach will come, we will not have to flee. We will not have to run. We talk about this a lot on the night of the Seder, where on the one hand we say that this is the bread of affliction. At the very beginning of the Seder, it's the bread of affliction. We're still in Egypt, and so on. And then just before we eat the matzah, we sort of summarize. We say, this matzah that we eat, what is its purpose? Because our ancestors fled. But we talk about that, like the days that we left Egypt, I will show you even greater wonders. What's the greater wonder? Why is Mashiach going to be better than the time of leaving Mitzrayim? Because when we left Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim was still there, as evidenced by the fact, again in the Parsha, that they came chasing us down. One of the reasons why the Pasuk describes in this week's Parsha that the Egyptians didn't drown in the sea, but they died and were spit back up, meaning ordinarily they would drown all the way to the bottom. Why were they spit back up? Because otherwise the Israelites were afraid the Egyptians had survived the sea like they survived, and they were going to come and get them tomorrow. But when Mashiach will come, there will be no more Mitzrayim dragging us, so we won't have to run out. So it's not about whether we go out quickly or we go out leisurely. The concept is whether there's still some force that is pulling us back. And again, this is true in the micro as well as in the macro. Whatever it is that we are attempting to free ourselves from, the mechanism to free ourselves from is to find our simcha in our nefesh. But don't forget that the body, that is our humanity, remains tethered to Egypt. So again, Hashem revealed Himself. Yeah.
Is that why later on the Jews say, like, well, why'd you bring us out here? There was fish and stuff in Egypt.
Remember how good it was back in Egypt? Right.
Right.
The good old days. Yeah. Because it's what we know. So when we left Egypt, Hashem revealed Himself and we got caught up in it and we ran. When we knew we had to run, because we thought about it, we weren't going to do it. So we knew we had to run. I know this guy, he owns a gym. His favorite day of the year is January 1st. Everyone makes a resolution and they have all these sales and everybody's going to buy a gold pass and you'll do it, and if you pay for it, and then it's busy for a week or two. And then by February 1st, the 20% remain. So there is that sense. You have to, just jump right in with both feet. We had to flee because the Mitzrayim were not going away and they were still on the attack, as evidenced by the fact that they chased us down. And again, our message, our theme was, and this is a common theme we've seen before in Tanya, run away from it. Don't engage. Don't engage in the animal soul. Don't engage in Mitzrayim. Run as fast as you can. Just run. Now, fleeing is not ideal, but it was necessary in the circumstance. So now the Alter Rebbe gives us, basically further underscoring why there is a value. I mean, it doesn't seem like a great strategy. Shouldn't we work this out? Shouldn't we figure it out? No, don't engage. As we've talked about before, when we wrestle with the dirty, we get dirty. Don't engage and just run away from it with both hands. When they open that gate, just go. Therefore, in the time of Mashiach, I've read this already, I'm sorry. We will not have to flee. We don't have to run away. We'll be able to go more slowly. And therefore, for this tshuva, that is this yearning and this racing towards Hashem, not just running away, but racing towards, will be with greater strength and greater enthusiasm from the depths of our heart. And again, the simcha will be the simcha of the nefesh. It'll be the simcha of the inspiration of our soul. That's where our focus is. And again, if my simcha is the simcha of my humanity, so they're fleeting simchas, and then I just spend my life waiting for the next one. Well, when am I going to have the next thrill and the next thrill? But if my simcha is the simcha of my nefesh, so that's an opportunity under all circumstances. What am I supposed to do with the fact that I have all of my impulses and I have all of my issues? I didn't make myself. The fact that my body says, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I didn't create that. Hashem created it. That's the way it is. So there's nothing I can do about that. There's nothing I have to do about that. My simcha, where is my celebration? Where is my joy? My joy comes from releasing my neshama. Hashem has programmed us as well that there is a great simcha, there is a great joy in empowering other people to be successful. There's a great pride in that. It's the pride of whether it's a classroom teacher or doctor and so on. You know, people say, I want a job where I can help people. Well, essentially every job helps people. That's why someone's willing to pay you to do it because no one pays you to do things that they don't like. So it is the capacity to empower the nefesh elokis, which happens to be my nefesh elokis, and let it go. You recall that we quoted Hillel, who Hillel is a tzaddik. So to Hillel, when he would go to eat, he would announce, I'm going to do a favor for my stranger. I mean, he considered his body to be like a stranger, and therefore eating was no different to him than feeding a stranger. We are not at the level of Hillel. We might sometimes see our nefesh as something estranged from us. So here, the Alter Rebbe is saying, okay, we can use that as an effective strategy. My nefesh is estranged from me. Well, I'm helping a stranger. I'm doing a kindness. I'm releasing him from this entrapped prison. So then, of course, the question is, why did Hashem set me up this way? Why did Hashem make me? I mean, wouldn't it be better if there just were no potato chips in the world, then I wouldn't have to worry about eating potato chips? Why did Hashem create me that I have all of these impulses for self-servingness? So this is our classic point, which we're all familiar with. Why did Hashem do this to me? Why did Hashem take this godly soul and put it down here in this body that only wants cookies and indulgences? Why did Hashem do this? The answer is, this going down is for a going up. This is a classic concept in Chassidus. And the simple illustration of it is, if somebody wants to jump up high, so they first squat down low and then they spring up high. Now you see this sometimes with children. They don't understand this. So they're just reaching, and you try to explain to them, well, why would I want to go down? I don't want what's on the floor. I want what's on the ceiling. So if a passerby sees somebody squatted down on the floor, we'd assume, oh, they probably want something on the floor. No, they want something on the ceiling. So why are you going down? Now, again, this is such an obvious example, but you think about this socially, where people never not us, we're perfect. Some people don't want to ever take a step back. They never want to allow anything else because they're afraid that they're going to be left out, they're going to be trampled, and so on. They don't ever want that. So when we tell them, look, if you'll allow this person, no, they become extraordinarily panicked by it, whatever the circumstance might be. So our point is, if we squat down just to stand up, well, then what was the point? This was a pointless exercise. If I squat down, I have to shoot up. I remember sharing this with a friend of mine when he was concerned about his business. He says, I don't know. 2 years ago, I had a thriving business. Now I'm struggling. I just want to be where I was. And I told him, don't just want to be where you were. When you squat down, you got to shoot up. You got to come out higher, stronger. You got to come out better. Otherwise, it's just an exercise in futility. So Hashem did not send the neshama down into this world just to dog paddle until the game's over so he can go back to where he was. Because then it's an exercise in futility. It's the Alter Rebbe, not in Tanya, but curiously makes an analogy of an investment. He says, if I have $100 and I invest it, I don't have the $100. I don't do that to get back $100 because then I lost money because my $100 in 6 months is worth less than it was now. I put in the $100. I hope to get $110. I make an investment to make a profit. People who garden, you take a seed and you put it in the soil. This doesn't make any sense. Where's my plant? But why do you plant the apple seed? To get an apple tree. Doesn't happen instantaneously, but otherwise there's no value. I'm taking something that's useful and instead I'm putting it in the dirt. But I put it in the dirt in the hopes of getting some profit of it at some later point. So Hashem has put my neshama in this body with all of my struggles, all of my difficulties, and this goofy goof is constantly nagging it and dragging it down. So what's the point? The point is not just that I should reinstate it, but it should be elevated. It should be at a more profound closeness with Hashem than it was before. That's this idea. We go down in order to go up. Lahalas Hashem. Kol nefesh achyenis avahamas shebeklipas nega b'chol lebusha hein bechinas machshav divromais. Shala aydei slapshu shavamais in machshavas hatayr. Koshkas lekaman in Allah zay bariches eichshi tachlis briyas oila. What is the profit? The profit is that I bring along, when the Nefesh Elokis is elevated, it brings with it the body and the humanity and all of my garments and all of that stuff. So again, it's sort of this tricky balance. On the one hand, we have, like, I'll use this term, a basic annoyance with the body. I want this, I want this. It's always complaining, it's always dragging me, never wants to do godly things. On the other hand, it's not our objective to just shed the body and just say, will you go away? Leave me alone, like a pesky little brother. Here's a quarter, now go away. Actually, the objective is to transform the body. People learn Basalagani. Friedrich Rebbe talks about this a lot. And you think about what life was like in 1950 and what the Jews were staring at. All of a sudden, the materialism that they had never seen in Russia, they never saw that in Eastern Europe, to have the opportunity to just engage themselves in all the indulgences. I mean, that was something that they had never seen. So there was a necessity for resistance, but there's also an opportunity, albeit a dangerous one, to transform it, to turn it around into something godly. And that's the profit that we bring to Hashem, that Hashem sends the godly soul down into this world, not only to resist the temptations of the body, but to do something even more, to transform it and to bring the body and all of its humanity and all of its character and all of its modes of expression into the service of Hashem. And as the Alter Rebbe gives us a little teaser in the bracket, he says, as we will explain later on, that this is, and he uses this crucial word, tachlis, the whole purpose of creation. The whole purpose of creation is not to ignore the body, not to hold my nose and say, I don't want to look at at my humanity, when I say the body, or the world. It is to go out and bring the world into the service of Hashem. That's the greater challenge. That's the hard thing. It's hard to resist the body. It's easier to ignore the body. The most difficult is to transform the humanity. And if based on this is the entirety of what I am doing. This is where all of my objective is, all of the days of my difficulties. And I devote my life, my spirit, my soul, like it says, to you, Hashem, my soul is driven. This is the objective. It is completely consumed with this mission. Dahainu, that means likashem achshavtai, to bond my thoughts, dibura, my words, b'machshavta v'dibura yisparach, with the thoughts and words of Hashem. Not to ignore thinking, again, a human process, or speaking, a human process. It is to illustrate that my human capacities for thought, speech, and action are able to not only be in compliance with Hashem, but they can even be transformed. And that's where the profit is made, in the redirection of my humanity into a spiritual form. This is the objective of all the laws that are laid out before us. And then down to action, to do the actions of the mitzvahs. So my humanity wants to eat, sleep, and drink. And my neshama wants to daven, learn, and do mitzvahs. So if I can get my body to daven, learn, and do mitzvahs, or I can get my body to eat, drink, and sleep in the service of Hashem, now I have added value. So again, just to return my neshama unharmed, certainly better than returning it broken. But then it's been an exercise in futility. You gave me 100, I return 100. You gave me 100 because you want me to return more than what you gave me. What is that more? When I include my humanity in the service of Hashem. That's why the Torah is called the settler of the soul, because again, it brings the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, back to its source, and even the nefesh habahamis is ultimately brought back to its source. To its source and its root. Well, Zanama, regarding this, it says, "B'kudei Hashem," the instructions of Hashem, Yisharim are straight. Mesamche leiv, they make the heart happy. The heart, again, the seat of the humanity. So rather than advocating being depressed all the time, I know that's extreme, or being ascetic, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that the ultimate simcha is when we release the nefesh elokis from the nefesh habahamis, or even more so when we transform it, when we make the nefesh habahamis an ally, and we win over its skills and capacities to become aligned and compliant with the service of Hashem. This process is what what's the word looking for? Evokes true simcha. So again, we know culturally that Hasidim are all about being happy, but don't confuse simcha with silliness or transient indulgence, because it's here today, gone tomorrow, the roller coaster. Rather, it's about a transformative experience that is celebrating the liberation of the nefesh elokis, and hopefully an aspiration, the inclusion of the nefesh habahamis in this uplift and transformation, and the profit, that's a better word, with a profit, that we bring profit to Hashem by incorporating our humanity and all of its skills in our relationship with Hashem. This finishes not only this chapter, obviously, but it's like a bit of a theme, which is going to lead us next week into chapter 32, which is a little bit of like a standalone chapter. Often when people say, let's learn a chapter of Tanya, they pick up chapter 32, and we'll see how the Alter Rebbe sort of almost parachuted it in there to make some points, that things that we're familiar with. But again, this is the strategy book that brought us to the cultural practices that we are associated or familiar with. All right, everyone should have a good week. I'll send out the recording.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Good week, everybody.
Good talk to everybody.
Bye-bye.